coastal management, protection of marine environment from land-based activities, human resources development through regional centers of excellence, development of national and regional oil and chemical skill contingency plans. These 4 areas are the major areas that we are working on. Supplemental South Asia 6 program is actively working to meet the mandate of the South Asia 6 Action Plan, and also is committed to contribute to the objectives of Undecade of Ocean Science for Sustainable Development. In this connection, SAHID has taken many activities and initiatives which include, but not limited to, the following activities. First, adoption of the regional oil and chemical pollution contingency plan for South Asia. All SAHID member countries are the signatories of regional oil and chemical spill contingency plan. Not all of the SAHID member countries have signed this. Second, on Ballast Water Management Convention, South Asia 6 program has achieved capability on compliance monitoring and enforcement, risk assessment, and geological business baseline surveys. So we are working in this area and we have developed our capacities. Third, on nitrogen management, SAHID developed a resolution on sustainable nitrogen management, which was adopted at UNFOR in March 2019, and now is working on the way forward for its implementation. I would like to thank the government of India for taking the lead for the submission of this resolution to UNFOR. And also, SAHID member countries, they supported this resolution during that meeting, which finally was adopted by the support of the SAHID member countries and other countries involved. To address nutrient pollution and develop science-based policy for South Asia region, South Asia Nitrogen Hub was established under the Global Challenge Research Fund. This is a major activities under which we have brought more than 50 research institutions from South Asia region as well as UK to work on nutrient pollution, particularly this is dedicated to ocean pollution. Fifth, adoption of the coastal and marine biodiversity strategy for the South Asia Seas region. Yesterday also I highlighted this issue. Sixth, adoption of the regional marine life action plan. Adoption of these two very important documents with specific actions and goals and indicators will be helping SAHID countries to do what are needed. Seventh, prevention of marine pollution by dumping of waste and other matter through promotion of the London Protocol. It will be ratified by our member states, and we are working with member states to adopt this protocol. It would be also helping member countries and South Asia regions to prevent land-based pollution, marine land-based pollution. 8. Adoption of the South Asia Roadmap for Sustainable Waste Management and Circulation. This is a very ambitious document which was adopted during last year. Of course, all of these documents that I mentioned, they adopted last year in the Governing Council meeting of SAHID by the SAHID ministers. So, particularly this South Asia Roadmap on Sustainable Waste Management and Resource Circulation is very ambitious document. One important part of this document is how to ways will be helping our member countries to avoid pollution of the marine and coastal areas. And finally, under this program, we will be having plastic waste-free river and sea project. This is a huge project which is funded by World Bank, and we are working with the World Bank to implement this project in South Asia region. The above site initiatives are well matching with the strategy approved for the Undecade societal outcome. The regional marine and coastal biodiversity strategy for the South Asia Sea region has identified specific goals, targets, and activities to be realized during the decade. The strategy is composed of 6 regional targets with specific actions developed based on 6 main goals for the conservation of biodiversity and sustainable use of marine and coastal ecosystems in South Asia Sea region, covering the following areas: ensuring ecosystem services and well-being. Second, prevention of extinction.
WG5.
Third, control of invasive alien species, sustainable fisheries and aquaculture. Fifth, prevention of marine pollution, and sixth, effective and equitable governance of marine and coastal protected areas. So this document will be helping some member countries to work on different areas that already identified by the IBC and also UNESCO. SOCIP as a regional organization looks forward to work with its member countries as well as its international partners, particularly IBC, to contribute to and support the decade objectives. At the end, I once again thank you all for gracing this occasion. Our joint partner is in the forefront to guide further progress our motion and cause. SOCIP's relationship with UN has a long history. We have jointly undertaken a large number of activities, especially providing the technical know-how to our member states to implement environmental-related conventions established by UN. I would like to thank UN for its continued support. I wish you all a very fruitful celebration during the 3-day workshop and hope you enjoy your stay in this beautiful city of China. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Abbas, for the overview of present activities. I will now request Dr. Regulation to give about the who's digital events and request you to kindly speak about 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman. First of all, this is my first meeting to attend as a GRA chair. I wish to thank Dr. Atmanan, Dr. Shanai, and our Secretary, Dr. Rajivan, for nominating me. And thanks to my colleagues and whose office in IOC who have provided this input. Also to previous past chairman, Dr. Glenn. So here, my emphasis here to introduce you to, many of you have come from this region. You are part of one among these GRAs, and what would be your country's role and what we are doing. Basically, GOOS is a global ocean observing system which takes care of the observing as well as the modeling and the final product development. It has got its own steering committee and scientific expert panels. It has evolved EOVs where different variables which need to be collected, physical, biological, chemical parameters have been listed, and observing coordination groups that involve various experts into that advises them. There is a GOOS project office located in IOC in wherein GRA is a group of alliances. You must have heard about IO-GOOS when Dr. Shanai was presenting about it. Dr. Nick has come from IO-GOOS and Dr. Srinivas was working there. So IO-GOOS is part of these 13 GRAs wherein we have linked together, and that has been brought together to take the principles of GOOS or Global Ocean Observing System to the member countries. In a nutshell, to say that it integrates the national needs to the regional system. You have a national program that has to be linked to the regional system. Finally, it evolves to the global system, linked to the global GOOS strategy and so on. That is the way the linkage takes place. So, There is a dedicated service goals, particularly you look at the oil spill contingency plan, which Sacramento recently presented about that. All this, and like a typhoon warning and cyclone warning, all these things are linked to that. There are also regional bodies like the GA organization structures, and the GRA forum meets twice, means once in 2 years. Recently, GRA 9 was held in Japan. You can read the report. I have given the link into that. That talks about complete deliberations of the various countries and inputs and what achievements have taken place. I will summarize because paucity of time, and few of the success stories I will show you here. This is a nutshell to say different GRAs. Some of them are politically linked. Some of them are different to the project. Some of them are like national programs involved with that. That is why these 13 GRAs have been listed here. If you look at it, I'm trying to see that how political consortium of like GRSP, Eurogos, they have been brought in together in this platform. You have a system by which 6 small island development states, how they have been evolved as part of the system, like Neogoos and Ocean Cloud. And you have a national program like IMAS of Australia, USIOS like a US program, how that national program have been evolved into this system here. If you look at the various activities of this, these are all emerging GRAs we can have, like India's observation network also will be part of that. We also take up capacity building exercise by part of IODE, where human resources, strengthen the communities of practice, sustain resource mobilization, that's what we are talking, visibility and awareness. Here, we'd like to appreciate what NOAA has done. They have been involved in 15 countries for the global observation program, like they have 100-hour board observation system. That is by interlinking the resources from the respective country, where the NOAA comes with their input, their equipment. That is the way they are making the data sets available to the global level. So, visibility and awareness, that's one of the focus for us here. And the ocean research policies that has been evolved, the national level to the regional level to the global level. Now, there are success stories. One of them is on the 6th, where this has been published recently. That talks about how this has been linked to the small island states. Subsequently, IMOs have been brought, improving the sampling data. They have also used glider. That sampling success stories have been brought in here. And they also have all the capacity building exercise. IOGOOS, you can see that sustained observation is happening in the Indian Ocean region. There is IRF, which is taking care of it. There is a capacity building exercise. Like Dr. Shah mentioned, in Iran and Hyderabad, we have IOC approved centers. IAOE too, that's a major focus here, which has been extended further. Similar like that, Neogoos and many other Caribbean Sea program, they all have got a success story that is linked to the Goose strategy, what we are talking about here. Finally, there is also an asset mapping we have done. We started in a smaller level. What type of virtual radar sets are there? What type of gliders are there? Particularly for global modeling inventory. This we want to emphasize and continue further also on marine mammals. This is what is asset mapping, and the global portal has been evolved. Anybody can go get into the global portal or can study that. So this is to say in nutshell that many nations now collaborate through GRA to build the regional observation program to cater to the need of global risk. With that, I conclude here. I wish to interact with all of you, your input or your feedback, how the GRA can be proceed. I will be holding this position for next two years. I would like to interact with you all. Thank you very much. So we have also given a small pamphlet here. You can go through that. I have given a link. This will be an opportunity for you to read later.
Thank you, Dr. Venkatesh, for giving the overview of this program. We will move to the next working group talks. It's now slowly we are getting the thick of Undecade. So in this case, we have the 6 themes starting with the oceans. 6 themes we have to complete within an hour's time. So all of you are requested to kindly speak for maybe about 7 minutes or so and have one question or something that we can do. So the first talk is on Clean Ocean by Undecade. Yes, sir. I just tell you one more announcement. You would have seen your kit something like a registration form, which is attached to this activity. So specifically what we need is your expertise or your interest among the 6 teams, if you could just indicate and hand it over to our team here for the discussions which are going to take place tomorrow, it will be useful. So may I request you maybe by lunchtime if you could fill this form physically and give it to our colleagues, one of them, Dash or or Vivek or any one of them, you please hand it over so that we can plan well for tomorrow's program.
Moved. So, actually identifying pollutants in our oceans is not a new thing. We've been, as many of you would know, there's been a lot of research that has been done into quantifying and identifying pollutants in our oceans. But are our scientific efforts adequate enough? And we've been told through a whole range of various outputs, not only our scientific outputs, but also global assessments of our oceans, that our scientific efforts are not adequate enough, particularly when we think about those words around reduce and remove. So what is needed to accelerate our efforts in order to achieve a clean ocean? So this is where we are, and this is where we would like to be. We'd like to move our science from being problem diagnostic, that is identifying and quantifying the pollutants, to actually providing solutions so that we can reduce and we can remove them. We want our ocean observing systems to move from localised systems to integrated systems. We want to move from major knowledge gaps to fewer knowledge gaps and an ocean literate society. Only by lifting up the whole of society and understanding not only the pollutants that are in our oceans, but also the actions that are needed to reduce those pollutants in our oceans, are we going to move forward. We need to have clear value chains leading to resourcing and commitments. We need our governments to be committed to reducing and removing those pollutants. And we need increased capacity and transfer of technology. We need to make sure that no one is left behind and that we are all working together to reduce and remove pollutants from our ocean. So if we look at the feedback from the first global planning meeting, they identified that to achieve a clean ocean, we need to minimise inputs of all contaminants and pollutants, and ensure that they don't have adverse effects on physical, chemical and biological processes, ecosystem functions and ecosystem services. So in identifying what actions might need to be undertaken at a global level, the first global planning meeting working group identified that links between pollutants, ecosystem impacts and human health need to be defined and quantified. We need to identify ecological thresholds and boundaries, including effects at the population level, so move beyond individual effects. We need to quantify impacts on human health. We really need to identify not only the sinks of pollutants, but also the sources of pollutants and how pollutants move between sources and sinks. We need to understand the half-life of pollutants and the rates of degradation. We need to also identify, in looking forward, the interactions between pollutants and climate change. So how the changing ocean might not only affect the emergence of new pollutants, so changes from current pollutants into new forms of pollution, but also changes to toxicity. And we need to identify new solutions to controlling the release of pollutants. And the emphasis there is to move beyond just simply cleaning up what we're doing, but also reducing and removing those pollutants at their sources as well. And overall, they identified a couple of overarching actions that we need to undertake, and that is provision of information is needed to increase societal and political willingness to respond. So we really need to build those interfaces between science and policy and science and political action. Provision of information to local authorities in the private sector to improve waste and wastewater treatment facilities. So to move the way that we manage waste in our environment forward. So if we think about the pathway from observations to actually development, to actually developing sustainable approaches, we need to move through observations to assessments to development of tools to then provision of that information. And that needs to cover not just the physical environment, but the biogeophysical systems, economic, social and cultural systems, and we need to build multidisciplinary, interdisciplinary teams. And what the Decade is asking of us is that we innovate across all of those steps on our pathway. And by innovating and building capacity development, we also build greater participation and new collaborations that will allow us to achieve a clean ocean. We also need to think more holistically. We need to think of the system as a whole and how each component of the whole system can contribute to a sustainable future. And we need to be moving towards a circular economy where our waste is not released into the environment, that we actually come up with solutions where we can reuse and reduce and close that loop on the circular economy from production through consumption to processing. And by taking multi-stakeholder, multidisciplinary approaches, we build new connections between ocean stakeholders, and that facilitates greater involvement in decision making when it comes to thinking about what we produce, what we release, but also how we reduce and remove those pollutants from the ocean. We also need to think about enhanced transfer of capability, technology and knowledge, and in particular investment across both capability and capacity development. And we need to be thinking about development of new mechanisms for involvement in science so that we transform businesses and industries, which are our major sources of pollutants, but we also change behaviours in individuals so that we're not releasing as much plastics, for example, into our ocean. We need new sustainable and eco-friendly materials, new forms of capture and recycling, and movement towards a circular economy. And I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Karen, for the excellent overview, setting a stage for the further discussions. Can we have one question? I have a question. Yes.
I will go to her. Thank you, Dr. Karen, for your wonderful presentation. My observation is the following. Everyone in the globe is trying to control so-called reduce, minimize. What's happening, reduce is going to give a different connotation today I reduce, tomorrow I reduce quantity. So instead of that, I think as a matter of concern and a philosophical thought from this room should emerge that we should prevent, prohibit, punish, and also one more P I have, I'll tell you later.
So, yep, it's on. Okay.
Analyze.
I totally agree that there needs to be multiple approaches to this problem. And some of those will be working very localised, and some of those will be working at national, regional and international levels. And we need to move from being quite isolated in the way that we think about addressing this problem to bringing the whole of society along to addressing this problem. And that will take thinking about what are our solutions across the whole chain of production through to how we manage post-production as well. So from the individual through businesses and industry right up to our governments as well. It won't be a one solution fits all either, and I think one of the things that I'd like everyone to think about, particularly this afternoon, is how can this region best address this problem, and what are the solutions that this region can bring to addressing this problem, particularly across this region, because it's going to be quite different to how another region might address the problem.
Yeah. Because the removal has also got the expenditure problem. So that's one thing that one should keep in mind.
Thank you, Dr. Karen. We are looking forward to the next presentation by Meanwhile, I would like to indicate that each of these teams, you have got the support from our rapporteurs. I would like to introduce rapporteurs for this session. They are here now. For the key notion, Dr. Shankara. Yes, can you just show so that they know who is. Then for the healthy and the skin notion, you are on ground. Now, yes, you are on ground. And for the medical notion, for the same portion, we have got Dr. Prasad. Yes, Prasad, please Prasad. And for the sustainable productive ocean, we have Dr. Sanjana. Yes. Tomorrow. And for the transport access to the ocean, we have Dr. Panda. Panda is there. So, before just going, I really thought that we just introducing all of us. Maybe because we didn't have this presentation, we can have a round of reflection among ourselves. Sorry that I missed it because of the taste. This we are going to start the session. Dr. Vinesh is a professor from Indian Institute of Science, Bangalore. He is a very senior photographer of the country, and we will hear from him.
Very good afternoon to all of you. It's a real honor to speak to this community here, and let me thank Dr. Atman and the organizers for giving me an opportunity to come and talk to you. By profession, I'm a physical oceanographer with also some level of expertise in marine ecosystem modeling.
So I have rather limited experience in policy and such matters. So this is sort of debut for me in such forums. And so this is the responsibility given to me to chair this theme on healthy and designing oceans. This, as you have heard from the several talks in the morning, this is a very important topic because oceans are really vital for our existence and survival. And here are some of the facts that 70% of the oxygen that we have for us, for our use, actually comes from the oceans. And now those who are familiar with the data on literature is well aware that there are major problems with the oxygen distributions in the oceans. The so-called regions of oxygen minimum zones in the oceans are expanding. Particularly when they come to India, both Arabian Sea and Bay of Bengal have major issues with oxygen minimum zones, which are expanding, and they are actually reaching out to our coastal regions, which affect the upwelling zones and fishing in that particular area. So the other important feature of the ocean is that ocean is very important for maintaining the balance of the Earth atmosphere system. The ocean is a slow component of the global climate system. So how the oceans manage and distribute heat is very important in determining many features of our climate and weather systems. Finally, there are rapid variations in climate, and which happens from scales ranging from seasonal, which affects to this region most, and at interannual scales like El Nino and North Atlantic oscillation and so on. So all these features are modulated by a large extent by what happens in the ocean. Now, presently, these are some of the numbers which matters to the ecosystem of the world. The global economy is contributed by about 21 trillion US dollars from marine resources. And the marine ecosystem also provides about 260 million jobs. And it's a source of protein for about 1 billion people worldwide. These are important numbers. So we have to pay attention to them and to these numbers and make sure that these are not affected and people don't suffer because of the deficiencies in these numbers. As we have heard from many talks in the morning, the marine ecosystem is under stress, and about 87% of the fisheries are currently reduced to the limits of their capacity or their levels below. So these are affected by either climate change, which is rather occurs on a larger scale, global scale, which can change the temperatures of the ocean, change the salinity of the ocean, change the pattern of ocean currents, and reduce oxygen availability, and so on. So there are additional factors which requires rather immediate attention, such as plastic, marine plastic, the oil which comes from various sources, and increasing industrialization along the coastal belt, which can introduce a large amount of effluents into the sea. So our major target in respect of all of them is to restore and maintain marine ecosystems, which includes fisheries and marine diversity at healthy levels. So these are the facts which is easily, readily available to you from various documents that is already available on the internet. But what I would like to focus on one last point is the special attention that we need to pay when we focus on the Indian Ocean. The special feature of the Indian Ocean is that it comes under the monsoon regimes. So when we take the Indian subcontinent, we have about 4 months when it rains heavily, we have large amount of rainfall, heavy winds, and in fact all the water that is required for the subcontinent is received during these 4 months of rainfall. And this rainfall pattern has more or less remained steady but it has undergone large fluctuations from year to year. There are, for example, 2018 was a year in which different parts of the country had experienced major floods, and similarly 2019 also had a lot of rainfall, which also led to floods in several parts of the country. Now, which means that there are large surges of fresh water entering the land, and all this water ultimately enters the ocean and can introduce substantial changes to the ecosystems, which would lead to changes in the fisheries. So it is required to have a concerted effort on documenting these changes and assessing the responses that the ecosystem would undergo through these changes. Now, one example of a concerted effort that I would like to highlight in this forum is what we had done under the umbrella of UNESCO and IOC called International Indian Ocean Expedition 2 program. So the first International Indian Ocean Expedition was done in the 1960s, when the first proper organized mapping of the Indian Ocean was done. And 50 years hence, it was repeated by another effort. So this had participation from countries both around the Indian Ocean and from elsewhere, which has offered us a data set on multiple phases of the Indian Ocean. So this program also allowed a forum for collecting new data, developing new expertise, building new capacities, and producing new research, which helped to assess that the changes in the Indian Ocean has undergone over a period of time. So I believe that these 3 days, the excellent community that has assembled here would provide another new forum and develop strategies in order to face the challenges that the Indian Ocean is going to face in order to handle the stress that the growing economy that surrounds the Indian Ocean would face. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Nathan, for giving an overall picture to start discussions tomorrow. Can you have one question? Yes, please.
Yeah, I think while telling that 87% of fisheries is reduced to the limits of capacity, I find that, in addition to whatever reasons we have cited, climate change, pollution, or religious thing, over-harvesting of resources is one of the major issues which has been flagged in the Bay of Bengal region in our studies comprising the Bob-and-Abby countries. I think over-harvesting of resources, use of destructive types of fishing practices, destroying the coastal ecosystem, particularly the critical habitats, and also discard of bycatch. I think these things have also contributed to the decline in the fisheries over the years. I think this also should be included as one of the reasons.
Yes, this was not supposed to be a comprehensive survey of all the factors. So your suggestion is very well taken. I agree that there are several such factors that would have exert stress on the marine ecosystem. Yes, thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Nathan. Before we start the next talk by Dr. Sidney, let us have an introduction among ourselves, which I'm sorry I missed out haste. So my name is Atmanan, the Director of NIOT as well as Chair of IOC India, and Executive Professor for the Undecade Political Science.
My name is Abbas Basir. I am Director of South Asia Cooperative Environment Group, which is an environmental organization for South Asia.
I'm Dr. Vasubramanian, Vice Chancellor, State Nod Academy, formerly Director and Dean, Center for Concept in Marine Biology and University.
I'm Dr. Sampath, formerly advisor to the Ministry of Health Sciences and also the Director of the Coastal Zone Management Project here. And I have been post-retirement in 2005. I have been working with FAO, World Bank and other organizations as a consultant in fisheries and oceans. Thank you.
Professor of Economics at the University of Cosmos and Director of the Center for Global Governance.
My name is Yasser Al-Najah. I'm a senior research scientist at the Sea Research Center in King Abdullah University of Science and Technology. My major is physical oceanography and coastal zone mapping.
Good morning, my name is Neelamani. I am from Kuwait Institute for Scientific Research. I am a senior research scientist. My specialization is coastal engineering, especially on different type of coastal structures, extreme waves, and coastal vulnerability studies. Thank you.
I specialize in biology, food chain, and biodiversity.
Good afternoon. My name is Ahmed Rashid. I am coming from Maldives. I work in Maldives Meteorological Service and I look after the weather forecasting unit of Maldives Meteorological Service. Thank you.
Good morning. I'm Professor Dr. Bobé from Democratic Republic of Congo. Here I'm representing ANC Africa.
I am Dr. Sylvie Carole Entiam. I am from Cameroon. I'm representing AOC Africa. I am an oceanographer.
I am Roxy Matikol, climate scientist at the Indian Institute of Tropical Meteorology, also co-chairing the Indian Ocean Regional Panel, which is under IOC, Goose, and Clive Ward. Also a lead author of the IPCC special report on ocean and biosphere in a changing climate.
Yeah, good afternoon. I am Geeta K. Gopal. I am representing Indian Meteorological Department. I am working in the Cyclone Warning Division of Indian Meteorology Department, New Delhi.
Good afternoon. My name is Vivek and I am working as a project scientist in NCC.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Srinivas Kumar. I'm the head of the Indian Ocean Tsunami Warning and Mitigation System, Secretariat of the IOC UNESCO based in Perth, Australia. Previously, I worked for several years in INCOIS, heading the advisory services and satellite oceanography. Thank you.
Good morning. I'm Nick Dadamo. I'm a colleague of Srivanas's. I work for the UNESCO Intergovernmental Oceanography Commission in the Perth Program Office. Just as we are co-located here, we are co-located in Perth. That's a pleasure. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Karen Evans. I work for the Commonwealth Scientific Industrial Research Organisation, or CSIRO, in Australia, and I also sit on the executive planning group of the Undecade.
My name is Sergei Shpalov. I am head of the Center for Coordination of Ocean Research of the Russian Academy of Science. I am also a member of the PPG group, the group like Karen for the Undecade.
Good afternoon. My name is Sid Thurston. I'm with the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, NOAA, and I have the honor of co-chairing working group to create a predicted ocean. Thank you.
My name is Ed, Director of the Answer as the International Fisheries Science Coordinator at NOAA, which is a branch of the National Marine Fisheries Service. My background is international fisheries science policy for marine signals.
Good morning. My name is Amel Shefai. I am from Tunisia. I'm working at Science University, a professor, and also leading a research group about marine ecology. I'm interested in biomonitoring and validation of some tools for.
Hello, I'm Suchitra Surya. I'm a research associate at New York University, Abu Dhabi. I'm working on polar climate variability, particularly the Arctic and Antarctic sea ice variability due to tropical interactions.
Good morning. I'm Naveen Mamnu. I'm working at the National President Center for Coastal Ocean and Climate Studies. I'm working on a project in storm surge resilience. I'm also involved in a financial activity project at Garden River.
So good morning. Myself, David Rahman. I'm working with an UK-based international NGO called Water in Bangladesh. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I am Dr. Mohammad Muslimuddin. I'm an associate professor at the Department of Oceanography in Bangladesh. And I'm also working on ocean literacy campaign in Bangladesh.
Good afternoon. I'm Vijay Chandran, Professor of Oceanography at Indian Institute of Science, Bangalore. My expertise is in ocean field experiments, ocean modeling, and marine system modeling. I also co-chair the GODI Ocean View Science Team, which is now called Ocean Predict, and also member of the steering committee of the International
I'm Dr. Thomas. I'm here with the National Center for Science Studies at Toronto. Presently associated with Cameron Institute of Fisheries and Ocean Studies as a dean of one of the faculties.
Good afternoon. I am Rajit Joseph, the Executive Director of National Environmental Research in India. It's a non-profit joint initiative between India and Norway and the private sector. And we are also initiating a new joint projects with the European Commission and Ministry of Earth Sciences and the climate to investigate the climate points, especially for the marine ecosystem.
I am S.K. Mohanty, a professor at Research and Information System for Developing Countries, RX, located in New Delhi. It's an autonomous body of Ministry of External Affairs. I work on blue economy, blue growth, blue trade, SDG issues with BP and MOSPI, and also I work on issues related to physics. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Jayakumar Srilam. I represent CSIR, National Institute of Oceanography. Background is coastal engineering, coastal process modeling, work mostly on the coastal hazards.
My name is Florence Nagpita from Tanzania, Institute of Marine Science. I'm member of Western Indian Ocean Marine Science Association, as well as Western Indian Ocean Air Career Certification Network. I'm working as marine scientist in marine production, as we can say, any opportunities available in the ocean and ocean or coastal ocean assessment in pollution.
Good afternoon all. I am from UCAS, Hyderabad. I am presently working on coastal geospatial applications.
Morning everyone, myself Priyan Murthy from UCAS, Hyderabad. Currently I am working for the real-time storm systems topic forecasting. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I know that there are two more rows. Due to paucity of time, I request you to introduce during the next time and we will go ahead with the presentations. I'm sorry that I'm not able to take care of everybody due to paucity of time. We will go to the next presentation on predicted oceans by Dr. Sidney Thurston.
Do you have
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Sid Thurston from the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration at NOAA. And I have the honor and privilege of co-chairing Working Group 3 at Predicted Ocean. I think it's important to realize that of all the 6 working groups within the Undecade, that a predicted ocean is going to actually be important for all of the 6 groups. So it's a cross-cutting working group. Here we are, the Indian Ocean, United Nations Decade Ocean Sustainable Development. And the Indian Ocean is actually very rich in science that impacts 1/3 of the world's humanity, and it also has far-reaching impacts around the world. And I think that's often overlooked. So what we do in the Indian Ocean actually has huge implications around the globe. The monsoons are very important, of course. I'll go over this very quickly. The Madden-Julian Oscillation, which is the genesis of the Western Indian Ocean, propagates across the Indian Ocean, across the Pacific Ocean, with global impacts. Tropical storms. The Indian Ocean dipole likewise affects the global precipitation and temperature patterns, and others. I won't go over all these in this time. The point is, what happens in the Indian Ocean affects the globe. So our job is very important in getting the predicted ocean right. The good news is we've come a long way. Since I started over 20 years ago working in the Indian Ocean, we've made remarkable progress. And part of that has been the second International Indian Ocean Expedition, IIOE2, which we launched in Goa in 2015, over 500 participants. Technology is amazing these days. We have a large suite of observations that we will be using to predict the ocean. We've been doing the Indian Ocean Observing System for 20 years now. We just finished our second review. So we have a brand new plan for the Indian Ocean Observing System, and I'm chairing the Indian Ocean Observing System Resource Forum. You can see here, this is the Indian Ocean at the turn of the millennium, and now we've come a long way in just 20 years. This is where we are now for the Rama Array, moorings across the entire Indian Ocean basin. NOAA's been involved for, like I said, for over 20 years. We've been contributing Indian Ocean planning and implementation. NOAA signed the Indian Ocean Goose Agreement in Mauritius in November 2002, and I'm chairing the Indian Ocean Resource Forum. We have a very strong partnership with India's Ministry of Earth Sciences for over 1 decade, and the NOAA ship was in the Indian Ocean just last summer. We also believe in capacity building within the Indian Ocean. These are 30 capacity building workshops we've had in the last 10 years, and these are some of the East African capacity building workshops. And I highlight those because I think that's one group that we need to focus on, is bringing East Africa into the Indian Ocean. So with that, Chair, I think I'll stop. We have a big job ahead of us, but we have a lot of momentum going with the IIOE2, the Indian Ocean Observing System. And my vision is to make the Indian Ocean the shining spotlight, if you will, for the Undecade. I think we can do it. We've been working together a long time. We know each other. We have the infrastructure in place. The institutional partnerships are in place. And I think we can build an end-to-end concept of ocean observations, research, modeling, assimilation, forecasting, and then intense stakeholder engagement. What do the stakeholders need from this predictive capacity? Thank you, Chair.
Overall, questions you can take. Yes,
Yeah, thank you very much, Sydney. Just a quick question. Is there any future plan by NOAA to observe the adjacencies in the Indian Ocean?
There's been talk, I've heard talk, I've not seen anything firm yet, but I think it's probably in the discussion stage, to my knowledge. I look forward to talking more with you.
Okay, good, thanks. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair.
And next, there is same portion,
Yeah, thank you very much, Chair. If you don't mind, I can speak from here. I don't think I'll read you mine out. So in terms of the safe ocean, I'm glad Dr. Thurston preceded me, because yesterday he gave a wonderful talk at the IOCDO meeting on which was aimed at broadening our geographical context for a safe ocean. Srivanasa will talk after me in a more coastal context in terms of processes and the phenomena which can impact on humans at the coast. But I'm taking yesterday's talk as a segue from Sid. You know, I guess in our mind we think about a safe ocean in the Indian Ocean. The discussion often comes down to what climate change is doing to us. It's acidifying the oceans, and what does that really mean? It means that the pH is going down. It's affecting organisms with calcium-based structures. So primary producers such as corals and smaller and impacting on nurseries, which then has an issue, which then has an impact on food security, because the amount of protein that comes from these habitats, these coral reef habitats, is reduced. There's a loss or a diminution of protective structures. I mean, structures that exist off the coast baffle waves and tsunamis. So if you live at the coast, you rely on these barriers to protect you from harmful gravity waves and surges. The lowering of oxygen, Dr. Shinoy this morning, I think, covered a lot of this. I'm not going to repeat what he said, but, again, this is an issue of food security. I mean, we're having climate change that's increasing the vertical stability by increasing the temperature of surface waters. It's reducing the ability of windmixing to get oxygen down into the deep. So, and we have classic examples of very, very profound oxygen minimum zones, Arabian Sea, the Indian Ocean, and the Bay of Bengal. And again, this is the food security issue. No oxygen, or lower oxygen, impact on fish and fish sustainability. Temperature, the oceans are warming, and we're having phenomena now that are becoming more and more regular, which are environmental shocks, and such as marine heat waves. So some regional areas of the Indian Ocean have mean temperatures over months, or 1 or 2 or 3 years, that are up to 5 degrees warmer than long-term big averages for those times of the year. And we have examples of the environmental degradation, the environmental stress that is done to habitats that marine biota, particularly off the central Western Australia, for example. Bleaching due to temperature stress, again, impacting on corals, impacting on various primary producers as habitats for fish. Shifting ecosystems, this is a more subtle one, but as the oceans change in terms of their temperature, we're seeing latitudinal shifts in the ambient conditions that exist. And so the biota that exist and rely on the habitats and the ecosystems at any point have to work out whether they can follow a latitudinal southward shift in the zone due to climate change. Whether they can or cannot is an issue. And even if they could, sometimes what they do when they travel south is they hit a marine desert. They don't go to a place that they can live in. So that's profound. One of the most important impacts is the impact on coupled weather. And Dr. Robinson, who's here and is the co-chair of the Indian Ocean Region Panel, is intimately interested and engaged in that issue through the IOE tour, through the Indian Ocean Region Panel. The Indian Ocean Dipole, the Mann-Julian Oscillation, the monsoons, cyclones, winds, all have a profound impact positively or negatively on coastal populations, 3 million people around the Indian Ocean. All of those phenomena, all of those mechanisms are being impacted or influenced by changing climate, changing sea surface temperature patterns. Rubbish and contaminants, I think Dr. Shinoy covered that this morning. Contaminants from toxicants, from plastics. That's the threat to people that live around the Indian Ocean. Climate change in Australia, in my country at the moment, we're experiencing what I believe is the most profound and severe natural disaster, environmentally related natural disaster that I can remember really remembering. And irrespective of what climate skeptics are saying in my country, climate change is an issue that in this respect. We have a much longer, wider summer season now. It's much hotter. That relates to climate change, relates to issues like the Indian Ocean dipole, the Manchurian oscillation, El Nino, La Nina in the Pacific, and it's impacting on hundreds of thousands, millions of people through loss of life, through loss of property, through burning, and 500 million or more native species have been killed by these fires. Flooding, sea level rise, I hand over to Srinivasa.
Thanks, Nick. Thank you very much. You make my job very simple. So what I'll actually quickly run you through is 3 or 4 slides on what has been written in the roadmap for the ocean decade with respect to the safe ocean. So you'll find references at several places in the roadmap, and then the safe ocean is one of the societal outcomes, main societal outcomes of the ocean decade. And then one key priority focus areas is actually integrated multi-hazard early warning systems. What is the scope when we talk about safe ocean? So the human communities are protected from ocean hazards, and safety of operations at sea and on the coast is guaranteed. So we talk about ocean hazards such as storm surges, tsunamis, HABs, coastal erosion, and all those actually other related coastal hazards ocean hazards that Nick has just told us. And so why it's important also because of the economic expansion and growth of population, making all of our coasts more vulnerable to ocean extremes. And of course, the climate change impacts. Already we see evidence of increasing frequencies and intensities of episodic hazards actually. And the decade, as part of this, we should endeavor to promote research aimed at reducing and minimizing the impacts of various changes. So risk reduction and adaptation and mitigation, and also support the development of integrated multi-hazard warning systems. And other important thing parallelly that we also need to endeavor to do is actually to enhance the community resilience and adaptive capacity with elevated education and awareness. You could have the best warning systems, but unless people know how to respond to warnings, how to understand those warnings, then so it doesn't actually result in effective mitigation. So again, this is reflected in the strategic objectives set 3. There are 6 strategic objectives as part of the ocean decade. So this talks about saving lives and reducing risks from extreme events and ocean-related hazards through an accelerated program of research and development and support integrated multi-hazard early warning systems. So what are some of the actions and expected benefits? Because we are going to have a specific session tomorrow, a panel discussion and a group discussion. So these are some of the things we should actually keep thinking about. So these are some of the example of actions. Substantial improvement in warnings. So we have warning systems, but we need to actually endeavor to enhance the lead times and specificity of these warnings for coastal hazards. For all kinds of hazards, actually. And increased capability to predict dangerous tsunami events, including those arising from unstable bottom layers. Like, for example, we had events, now we can do good warnings for earthquake-generated tsunamis, but not for other events like the ones that Dr. Shana spoke this morning on submarine landslides, volcanic eruptions, etc. And accelerate and enhance research on advanced warning of ocean hazards, and complete the WCRP grant challenge on regional sea level changes and coastal impacts. So, of course, we all know the obvious benefits: save lives, populations for coastal management and planning in resilient communities. So I'll not run through all these things. What I will take you directly is an example of tsunami, how the tsunami community, global tsunami community, has been getting up towards ocean decade, contributions to the ocean decade. This is actually a lot of work done under the guidance of, with the leadership of Mike Ango from US NOAA, who was actually brought together the global tsunami warning community from all the 4 ocean basins that is coordinated by IFC UNESCO to come up with a community paper on observations required to minimize uncertainty in global tsunami forecasts, warnings, and emergency response. So the aspirations of the global tsunami warning community, for example, here is to enhance hazard assessments for all sources and detect, model, and monitor from all sources, reduce uncertainties in warning products. This is what this graph shows here. The longer you wait to give out a warning, the better accuracies you have in tsunami warnings. But for the nature of tsunamis is such that you need to give out a warning as soon as possible. So how do you reduce those uncertainties? How do you cut down on the time of warnings? So we need to do a lot of research to actually be able to generate warnings in time to trigger response, proper response. So that needs actually enhanced observations. This is the schematic that you see here, aspiring to actually enhance observations by submarine cables, smart cables, GNSS systems, etc., etc. And then you also need a lot of bathymetry and topographic mapping, not only for tsunamis, but even for other modeling that we intend to do, ocean and coastal modeling. You need good topographic bathymetry, which we don't have at reasonable scales now. You need computing facilities, and then on the other hand, you also need the communities to be prepared actually. So this is what we call the tsunami ready kind of communities. This is what actually we are thinking of, where every community that is vulnerable to tsunami knows what is their vulnerability. This is actually a concept from New Zealand, which is called the blue line. That means they know that, okay, beyond that line they're safe, but then if they are within that line, they are affected. So these are kind of maps that we aspire as a community, global community, to actually generate for the whole region. And there were some points from the Working Group 4 meeting, global planning meeting in Copenhagen, which we should take on board. I'll talk about it a bit later tomorrow when I actually talk in the Working Group panel discussion. I guess that's pretty much what I wanted to say. Thank you very much.
We have one question from the member states, which we actively question. There are no questions. We move forward. Perhaps lunch is very delayed. Sorry, I think we can complete these 2 more and then we break for lunch. So the next presentation is on sustainable productive ocean by Dr. Faisal Transkisar Kuwait.
Good afternoon. First, I'd like to thank the National Institute of Technology and Government of India for hosting and for organizing this important workshop, and also for inviting me to speak at the workshop. I'll be talking about the societal goal number 5, sustainably harvested and productive ocean. And I'm not going to go over all the slides to abide by the 7 minutes given for the presentation. Unfortunately, we are in a deep crisis of values because nowadays progress and success are primarily measured by material value of goods and services. And the global rush to develop the blue economy risks harming both the marine environment and human well-being. And that's what I think, that it's time now to return to a values-based society, and for the private sector and the government to assume their social responsibilities. And so the partnership between or among public, private, and social entrepreneurship is very important to create a world which is socially and environmentally more sustainable. And new paradigms are necessary to build environmentally sustainable and socially equitable blue economy of tomorrow. So partnerships among the governments, business, civil society, and research institutions, they're vital for clean, healthy, and productive ocean. And of course, that is important because for doing that, you require policies and actions, and policies require ocean science knowledge to ensure protection of our ocean for sustainable economic growth. And that's why the decade offers a golden opportunity to strengthen the management of our oceans and cause for the benefit of humanity. I will not go over this because it is in the concept note. Basically, these are the objectives for the working groups, identifying the knowledge gap, proposing R&D priorities, and discussing the role of the cross-cutting themes, for example, the capacity building and marine technology transfer. The outputs, they match the objectives. They're all in the concept note that was circulated to us. So this slide and the following slides will focus on the working group 5 theme, which is a sustainably harvested and productive ocean. Again, mentioned earlier, this requires targeted research and policies to achieve the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development Goals. The SDGs, of course, are now the main reference for the development of policies and programs at the national level. And these strategic goals were mentioned also in the concept note. Basically, they relate to this societal outcome. 14.4, regulating harvesting and overfishing and illegal fishing. 14.6, eliminate subsidies that contribute to illegal fishing. SDG 1, reduce poverty. SDG 8, promote sustainable economic growth. SDG 2, ensure food security and zero hunger. And the SID Samoa pathway. These are the different topics which are, the basically knowledge gaps that relate to the societal goal number 5. And under each of these headings are several questions to be answered, to reach the understanding. So I will not go over them, but I'll just read the headlines. Links between ocean health and impacts on resources and blue economy sectors, impacts of blue economy sector activities on fisheries, climate change impacts on fisheries, impacts on the seabed, ecosystem function and sustainability at the ecosystem level. This one, I will give an example for Kuwait at the end. Challenging biases, including geographic biases and taxonomic biases, understanding the future of food production from the ocean, understanding trade-offs between different uses of the ocean and its resources. They all relate to the societal outcome number 5. And this summarizes the recommendations for activities in support of the goal, which is basically developing compliance standards for fishing, develop a global scale literature summary on species distribution, identify best practice approaches and adopt these in access to data, develop an early warning system to manage risk to food resources. And the cross-cutting actions needed for the decade that include capacity development and technology transfer. And the UN global bodies such as the FAO, UNESCO, IOC, and UNEP, they have capacity development programs that could be helpful. partnership and financing, especially regarding the sustainable global ocean observing system, access to data, information, and knowledge, for example, establishing databases and digital atlas, and communicating the decade with the focus on ocean literacy. This is an example now I'm going to give. On Kuwait, we are part of the Rukni Sea area. We are in the, this here, in the inner, sorry. Okay, and so this is just to statistics. The government spends 0.3% for research, Kuwait. 10% of that goes to the marine. So, you know, as you see, it's not that big, but anyway, we are doing effective research. So we would like to assess where we are now and where we would like to be in 2030. We have major knowledge gaps, weak ocean literacy, weak governance. I'm sorry to say that, but you know, this is the fact, and I think you know we should improve. We need to add value by integrating social and natural sciences, and also traditional knowledge. Capacity building and coastal observing system is needed. We have a small group that works on it, but we really need, I think, to strengthen that. Strengthen access and use of science by policymakers and citizens. Promote partnerships with private sector, and invest in multi-hazard warning systems and modeling. These are really key needs for Kuwait. And this is an example. You know, if we take the, for example, the ecosystem function and sustainability at the ecosystem level, the knowledge gap. This is one of the knowledge gaps. I've listed some of the projects that would be helpful for us to understand more about this. Pelagic microbial food web dynamics, biogeochemical cycling and benthic pelagic coupling, habitat mapping, status of fisheries and demersal stocks, develop indicators of ecosystem change, develop indicators for sustainability, and the food web model for fisheries. Facing that, we have recommended activities, regulations and planning, you know, to put compliance, targets for sustainable fishing, establish guidelines for aquaculture, waste discharge, whatever, data access and sharing, capacity development, transfer of marine technologies, and several of these. And then ocean literacy, which is also very important, and social sciences. We need to understand the social structures to enhance the resilience of coastal communities and reduce vulnerabilities. And this is the last slide, and I'd like to announce, I'm pleased to announce actually, our newest multi-purpose fisheries oceanography vessel. And we welcome all the interested scientists on board to conduct joint research in oceanographic and fishery science. And thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Faisal, for giving an excellent overview. And I see is the research vessel which perhaps will be useful for all universities. So we have one question. Yes.
Dr. Faisal, after hearing you productive oceans, I do not find any mention on marine mammals anywhere, because mammals do influence multiple ecosystems. And nowhere I find a mention of marine mammals. Is it part of this or?
It's part of life.
It should be actually, but very important question, very important topic. We don't have in Kuwait anybody specialized in marine mammals, but you know it doesn't mean that we're not gonna. We will, you know, but I've just put priority areas. But definitely, it's very important.
Dr. Sanjeevan is the former director of CMLI, the Central Marine
Center for Marine Living Resources and Ecology.
And we are hoping in for our support for these sessions. So definitely Mammoth's part also is included. We will take care of it. Okay, thank you, Faisal. Last in the forum session is the presentation on transparent and accessible ocean and request Dr. Mohan, please.
Good afternoon. I am really thankful to NFD and particularly Dr. Atmanan for inviting me to this august gathering. At the very outset, I would like to say that the UN Ocean Science Decade is a complement to SDG Agenda 2030 because in recent review meetings, we have seen that for large number of countries, many of them are defaulting to a very large extent in different SDGs. Possibly in the next 10 years, many countries would cope up in terms of achieving several other SDG goals. Because the fulfillment or achievement of SDG 14 is also very critically linked with many other SDGs, and many such SDGs cannot be achieved without achieving the goal of SDG. So it is very important from the point of view of the health of the ocean. It is important that the transparency is very much required because ocean is again for the global commons and for the global well-being. So often it is seen that number of commercial elements are brought in to the whole process for which there is a need for regulations, and therefore for undertaking regulations to control the commercial activities, it is important that transparency is maintained. Similarly, there are many stakeholders to the ocean process, nations, specific stakeholders and citizens, and their access to data and information is very critical in terms of putting their views while taking different policy decisions at the global level, at the regional level, at the national level. Now, for data and information, it's important that to know that what kind of sciences that is there in the ocean. I think there are the field is so vast that it is very difficult to put them into a very specific taxonomy. And therefore, in this GOSR2 report, the entire taxonomy of ocean sciences are brought into 8 categories: marine ecosystem functions and processes, ocean and climate, ocean health, human health and well-being, ocean crust and marine hazards, ocean technology, blue growth. I think there is a lot of discussion we made in the morning sessions. I think I'll come back to this point. And the last one, the ocean observation and marine data, it is again a kind of cross-cutting, overarching kind of the process or the working group which covers all those 7 areas. Now, there are several ocean data centers what we see where they collect information on the different issues which are very much related to the existing and future research. Now, some of them are classified in the literature like physical, biological, and chemical. And whatever information collected through different ocean data centers, I think nearly half of it is related to fisheries and pollutants. So there are three types of ocean data which we generally see. They are of metadata, GIS products, and raw data access. Now, there are these centers that also focus on three major services. They are data retrieval, data visualization, and data quality control. So these are the taxonomy that we can see in the literature, that how data is being collected under the ocean science. So since the areas are vast and complex, I think there is a need for a comprehensive data policy to be evolved to make it a scientific way of collecting information, and that would really support open access. For the issues and the task which is presented to the global is mammoth. So that requires some thinking about funding model which can really help. Coming to blue growth, I think we have been discussing a lot, and there is a lot of debate since the last 5 decades that the blue economy is a part of the blue growth. So why blue economy is so important? Because this is the segment, the fastest going segment in any economy, which can really drive growth parameters of any country, mostly literal countries, and that's why it is important. And the presence of the elements of blue economy one can find in all segments of the economy, from agriculture to mining to industry to services, and therefore it is important. And it is again important because the blue economy approach again is very much linked to sustainable development. Now, it has got all other implications like employment. It's very high quality, small and medium sized enterprises, non-traditional security issues including food, energy, and several issues are involved, and therefore it is becoming very important. In many countries, the size of blue economy is small as compared to the total economy, maybe 1.8% for US, but it is very important for the economy because of its high growth potential. Now, the important aspect is that in blue economy, we have two components. The most important component is the emerging sectors. I think many sectors in the ocean sector not known, even we are into the whole process for the last 7 decades. So it is now the task of the scientists to find out what are the other new sectors which can really lead economies of individual countries. Now, there is a lot of discussion about the nature of the blue economy in many countries. Since there is no stylish facts that how countries would have access to different resources, different processes, therefore each and every country has to take it individually to that level to understand that what is their endowments available in that country. There is a lot of discussion about blue investment in the sector, and of course blue creation of blue technology, which is the mandate of this process. Now, blue voice is another one which is coming in a very big way, that many countries, particularly at the level of foreign ministers and above, have declared that blue economy is important, or the ocean economy is important for them as a growth driver. There are nearly more than 150 countries have already adopted such declaration in different forums. Now, important aspect is about the estimation. And here is the question of data, where there are difficulties related to data methodology. Similarly, there is blue trade, which is, as we know, that output, which is linked to GDP, grows much slower than that of trade. Trade grows much faster. And if under that analog, blue trade could be much high growth potential as compared to blue economy as such. So therefore, it is important that scientists should also look at blue trade. Why it is important? Because so far whatever we have done up to activities related to specific industries related to ocean. But when you talk about trade, it goes beyond activities or beyond industry. It goes to products. So product development is important for global trade in blue economy, and it is highly vigilant. Whatever is done. Recently in India, we have estimated and identified products where it is shown that blue economy is blue trade is much higher in terms of its share than ordinary trade with respect to GDP. Therefore, it is very important. And blue trade is mostly technology intensive. So it has got very important relevance for UN Ocean Decade. Now, in this, I think this particular workshop is focusing on Indian Ocean region, and there are large number of endowments that one can see in this region, ranging from flora and fauna to deep sea mining and various other issues. I think these are should also be covered while we discuss about trade. Similarly, in work program, we have got several issues including industrial affluence, port and inland water transport for dredging that has got environmental implications. Particularly in the shipping sector, there are issues related to operational pollutions related to blast water. Those solutions are very much required. So, in Rotmi, there are various initiatives by with action plan, which was initiated in '78. I think in the next we can discuss this thing. Gender issue is one which is linked to the ocean science sector. In ocean science, two important issues are very much important: researchers and scientific infrastructure. So, if we see the coverage of researcher, particularly in the ocean science, I think it is very much specific to specific countries. It is not into several countries, and also the variations are also quite large between countries in terms of age and gender. In the ocean sector, the UNESCO has recently estimated that nearly 13% of its researchers are female scientists. And it is much better a figure than what we see ordinarily the general other scientists to the total number of scientists. So this is gender dimensions should also be covered as we have seen in the mandate. SIDS and LDCs are two areas which are very critical areas. They need more attention, particularly in the Indian Ocean region. There are only few countries. There are 4 countries: Mauritius, Maldives, Comoros, and Seychelles. But in most of the small island countries, we can see the two sectors are very important: coastal tourism and fisheries, and substantial amount of their foreign earnings and employment coming from these two important sectors. So this is also very important for them because of their experiences related to tsunami that happened in 2004. There are a number of challenges that Indian, particularly Indian ocean SIDs face related to receiving assistance in terms of using ocean data as compared to Pacific countries. I think that some of the issues one can see, and they also need more support in terms of capacity building, technical assistance, monitoring equipments, and also access to equipments. Now, the last point is about the international cooperation. I think there is a need for international cooperation to have more result-oriented output. Now, in science, we can see that what is the basic objective of science cooperation is about the global scientific output and also its impact on global community. Now, when talk about collaboration, it should be in the form of joint projects and sharing of existing infrastructure for developing new technologies. And one can see that there are several technical institutions related to ocean science in the world. There is a need for some kind of coordination mechanism to integrate them. As I said earlier about the funding model to undertake various projects, it is also important. Now, I would stress that in different parts of Indian Ocean, you can see there are a number of regional forums, particularly regional trading groupings. So in that, you find there are members and also associate members. Like in IORA, we have got the members and also dialogue partners. I think they can be very effectively integrated to really focus on such kind of issues. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the overall overview. Any questions?
Yes, sir.
Sir, you stressed upon the collection of marine data and the coastal data. So the robustness of the science stands on the robustness of the data. Do you think that there is scope that when we collect data, whether it's a cross-country data or a cross-institutional data, that should be coming from one uniform standards? So the different generations of scientists, they would not be having difficulty to interpret that, and as a result, like when we go in future, we have more robust, more on a uniform platform.
I share with your point that there are some global standards, and I think while collecting data, we should follow that so that we can have very clear database which can be used for generations.
Dr. Roxy,
Yeah, this is more of a general comment. One of the recurring points which has come out from this Dr. Mohanty's working group or other working groups is that we require regional partnerships, and some of them have pointed out about resource sharing or data sharing. But another important point is that we need access to the exclusive economic zone, because a lot of processes or dynamics along the coastal regions are quite important to understand. Most of the points presented in the working groups, whether it is plastic coming from the rivers to the coastal region and contaminating the oceans, or the monsoon processes itself, the coastal currents, the Somali currents, and so a lot of important processes are determined along the coastal region. So we need, I think this is an important point that the Undecade of the ocean can put as a recommendation, access to exclusive economic zone. Thank you.
I think that's a good point. We will take care of that. And
Yes,
due
yes.
to lack of time, we have further discussions post lunch. So thank you, Dr. Mohanty, for sitting. Before break for lunch, I just want to give an indication that in the afternoon we have got ocean. On the slide, you can